I stood in my father's attorney's office, clutching the inheritance letter that had changed everything. After dedicating 15 years to building my father's company from struggling local business to industry leader, I'd been left nothing, while my stepbrother, who'd never worked a day in the company, inherited everything. But when the attorney revealed the second page of the will, the room fell silent. No one, especially not my stepbrother, was prepared for what came next. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mahogany grandfather clock in Mr. Harrington's law office ticked loudly as I sat rigidly in a leather chair, still processing the words I'd just heard. My name is Cassandra Mitchell, and today I learned that my father, Richard Mitchell, founder of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals, had left his entire estate, including the company I had helped build, to my stepbrother Lucas. There must be some mistake, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I looked around the room at the shocked faces of our extended family. My stepmother Vivian's expression was unreadable, though I detected a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Lucas looked as surprised as everyone else, though his surprise quickly transformed into poorly concealed satisfaction. Mr. Harrington adjusted his glasses and glanced at me with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. I'm afraid the will is quite clear, Ms. Mitchell. All shares in Mitchell Pharmaceuticals, the family home in Greenwich, the vacation properties, and liquid assets totaling approximately $78 million are to pass to Lucas Bennett, with the exception of a personal item mentioned in this letter addressed to you. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in my father's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Inside was a key taped to the top of the page and a brief message. Cassandra, this opens my personal safe in my study. What you find there is yours alone. Dad. A small key. That was my inheritance after 15 years of 60-hour work weeks transforming my father's struggling local pharmaceutical company into a national success. A small key while Lucas, who had spent the last decade floating between expensive European universities without completing a single degree, received everything. The blood rushed to my ears as memories flooded back. I was 22 when I joined the company, fresh out of business school with honors. Mitchell Pharmaceuticals had been on the brink of bankruptcy, crushed by larger competitors and hampered by outdated production methods. My father had been desperate. Just until we get back on our feet, he'd told me when I'd put my own career plans on hold to help. No one understands this business like you do, Cassie. I need you. Those temporary months had stretched into years. I'd implemented new manufacturing systems, secured critical patents, negotiated distribution deals that had propelled us from regional player to national competitor. Meanwhile, Lucas spent his allowance, which exceeded my executive salary, on luxury cars and extravagant parties. I stared at the key in my hand, a thundering silence filling the office as everyone awaited my reaction. Part of me wanted to throw it across the room, to demand answers, to contest the will. But a lifetime of maintaining composure in boardrooms had trained me to mask my emotions. I carefully folded the letter, pocketed the key, and stood up. Congratulations. Lucas, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I hope you're prepared to run a company that employs over 3,000 people. Lucas's smirk faltered slightly. I'm sure I'll figure it out, or hire people who can. Like your sister has done for the past 15 years? My Aunt Eleanor spoke up from the corner of the room. My father's older sister had never approved of his second marriage to Vivian when I was 16, or the preferential treatment Lucas had received since their union. Vivian placed a protective hand on Lucas's arm. Richard obviously trusted Lucas's judgment. He must have had his reasons. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. There is one additional matter. The will stipulates that Ms. Mitchell must vacate her company office and relinquish all company property by the end of this week. Mr. Bennett is, effective immediately, the new CEO and majority shareholder. The room seemed to spin around me. 5 days to clean out 15 years of my life's work. 5 days to say goodbye to employees who had become like family. 5 days before I would be escorted out of the building I had helped design. If there are no further questions, that concludes today's reading, Mr. Harrington said, closing the folder in front of him. As people began to file out, my cousin Michael approached, his expression genuinely concerned. "This is insane, Cassie. You practically built that company. Everyone knows it." "Apparently not everyone," I replied, watching Lucas accept congratulatory handshakes from several relatives who had already mentally recalculated their relationship to the family fortune. Michael lowered his voice. "What are you going to do?" I clutched the key in my pocket. "I'm going to see what's in my father's safe. And then? I don't know yet." The truth was, beneath my shock and hurt, something else was stirring. Something that felt strangely like relief. For 15 years, I had poured everything into Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. I had postponed relationships, declined friendships, canceled vacations. I had become the company, and somewhere along the way, I had lost myself. Outside the law office, dark clouds gathered as I made my way to my car. The first heavy raindrops began to fall as I slid behind the wheel, mirroring the tears I finally allowed to come. I cried not just for the betrayal and injustice, but for 15 years of dedication that had apparently meant nothing to my father. When the tears subsided, I drove, not to my apartment, but to the Mitchell estate. I knew Vivian and Lucas would still be celebrating with their side of the family. The housekeeper, Maria, answered the door, her eyes widening when she saw me. "Miss Cassandra, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry." Maria had been with us since before my mother died when I was 12. She was one of the few connections to my early childhood, to the time when my father had been proud of me, before Vivian, and Lucas had entered our lives. "I need to check something in his study, Maria. I won't be long." She nodded, squeezing my hand. "Take whatever time you need. They won't be back for hours." My father's study remained exactly as he had left it 2 weeks ago before the heart attack that took him at 65. The leather chair still held the impression of his body. Half-finished notes for a board meeting lay on the desk. The familiar scent of his sandalwood cologne lingered in the air. I moved to the painting behind his desk, a landscape of the New England coastline my mother had painted before her death. Behind it was the wall safe I had known about since childhood. With slightly shaking hands, I inserted the key from the letter, surprised when it turned easily. I had expected the small floor safe in the corner, not this wall safe I had never seen opened. As the door swung open, I didn't find the jewelry or documents I had anticipated. Instead, there was a single leather-bound ledger and an envelope with my name on it. I removed both, closing the safe and replacing the painting. Sitting in my father's chair, I opened the envelope first. Unlike the brief note from the will reading, this letter was several pages long. The first line made my breath catch. "My dearest Cassandra, if you're reading this, then you've just experienced what must feel like the ultimate betrayal. Before you judge me too harshly, open the ledger." I set the letter aside and opened the worn leather book. Inside were detailed financial records spanning the last 10 years, records that did not match the official company books I was intimately familiar with. As I flipped through the pages, my professional training immediately recognized what I was seeing: evidence of massive financial fraud. With growing disbelief, I returned to my father's letter, reading his meticulous explanation of how Vivian and Lucas had been systematically embezzling from the company for years, siphoning funds through fake contracts and shell companies. My father had discovered their scheme only months before his death. "I could have gone to the authorities," he wrote, "but the scandal would have destroyed the company you've worked so hard to build. Instead, I've created a different kind of justice. By leaving everything to Lucas, I've handed him not an empire, but a criminal investigation waiting to happen. The forensic accounting firm I've hired will receive anonymous instructions to audit the company exactly 1 month after my death, which gives you time to distance yourself completely. I sat back in the leather chair, my mind racing with implications. My father hadn't betrayed me. He'd protected me while setting a trap for those who had been stealing from us for years. The letter continued. In the hidden compartment of this safe, accessed by turning the key twice to the left after opening, you'll find documentation of your actual inheritance, a separate holding company I established years ago that now controls our most valuable patents and international distribution rights. While Mitchell Pharmaceuticals will likely collapse under investigation, this new company, which I've named Cassandra Biomedical, will emerge as the natural successor in the market. With trembling fingers, I followed his instructions, discovering another compartment containing legal documents, digital storage devices, and banking information. According to the summary page, Cassandra Biomedical was valued at approximately $220 million, nearly triple what Lucas had inherited. The final paragraph of my father's letter brought fresh tears to my eyes. I'm sorry for the pain this will cause you in the short term, but I couldn't warn you without risking the entire plan. Your integrity has always been your greatest strength, and also your greatest vulnerability. They would have seen through any deception on your part. Know that I have always been prouder of you than I could express, and everything you've built will continue under your leadership, without the cancer that has been eating at its foundation. All my love, Dad. As I gathered the documents, a strange calm settled over me. The path forward was suddenly clear. I would follow my father's plan, step back, and watch as justice took its course. And then, from the ashes, I would build something new, something truly mine. I left the study with the ledger, the letter, and the documents secured in my briefcase. As I passed through the foyer, Maria appeared with concern in her eyes. Did you find what you needed, Miss Cassandra? I smiled, genuinely for the first time that day. More than I expected, Maria. Much more. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning, I arrived at Mitchell Pharmaceuticals headquarters earlier than usual. The modern glass building that dominated the Boston skyline had always filled me with pride. I had overseen its construction 3 years ago when we'd outgrown our previous facilities. Now, I felt like a visitor in my own home. Security greeted me with their usual respectful nods, unaware that my access would soon be revoked. My executive assistant, Diane, was already at her desk outside my office, organizing files with her characteristic efficiency. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," she said, then lowered her voice. "I heard about yesterday. I'm so sorry." News traveled fast in corporate circles. "Thank you, Diane. We have a lot to do this week. Could you please cancel all my external meetings and reschedule any critical internal ones to happen by Thursday?" Her eyes widened slightly at the compressed timeline, but she nodded professionally. "Of course. The executive team is requesting an emergency meeting as soon as possible. They're concerned about the transition. Schedule it for 10 this morning in the main boardroom." While Diane made arrangements, I entered my office and closed the door, taking a moment to absorb the space I had occupied for the past decade. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. Awards and patents lined the walls. The conference table where I had negotiated our first international distribution deal. The small seating area where I had mentored promising employees. I opened my briefcase and removed the critical documents from my father's safe, photographing each page with my personal phone before locking them in my private office safe. Then I began the painful process of determining what to take and what to leave behind. By 9:30, I had filled 2 bankers' boxes with personal items and research, notes that weren't company property. I'd also transferred personal files from my computer to an encrypted drive, being meticulously careful not to take anything that could be construed as company intellectual property. At 10 o'clock sharp, I walked into the boardroom to face the executive team, 8 senior leaders, most of whom I had personally hired over the years. Their expressions ranged from shock to outrage to calculation as they assessed where to place their loyalties in this unexpected transition. "I assume you've all heard," I began, seeing no reason to delay the inevitable. Effective immediately, Lucas Bennett is the new CEO and majority shareholder of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. I'll be leaving the company by the end of the week. A stunned silence followed before Thomas Chen, our chief research officer and my longest-standing colleague, spoke up. "This is absurd, Cassandra. You built this company. Everyone in this room knows it." Murmurs of agreement circulated around the table. "We can fight this," said Elena Diaz, our fierce legal counsel. "A will can be contested, especially when there's a clear case for your contributions to the company's value." I appreciated their loyalty but shook my head. "I've considered all options, and I've decided not to contest the will." "But why?" Thomas demanded, genuinely perplexed. "You've dedicated your life to Mitchell Pharmaceuticals." "Perhaps that's part of the problem," I replied, surprising even myself with the insight. "I've put everything into this company, to the exclusion of almost everything else. Maybe it's time for a change." Elena leaned forward, her legal mind already analyzing angles. "Is there something you're not telling us, Cassandra? Something strategic at play?" I maintained a neutral expression, careful not to reveal my father's plan. "All I can say is that I've made my decision. Each of you will need to decide your own path forward under the new leadership." "Speaking of which," said Marcus Reynolds, our chief financial officer, "has anyone actually met with Lucas about his plans? Does he have any experience whatsoever in pharmaceuticals or business in general?" "Lucas will be addressing the executive team tomorrow morning," I informed them, having received a company-wide email from Lucas just before the meeting. "I suggest you reserve judgment until then." "Will you be there?" asked Sophia Liu, our head of research and development. "No. Lucas has made it clear that my transition period ends today. He'll be bringing in consultants from Meridian Group to evaluate the company structure." I didn't add that Meridian Group was one of the shell companies my father's ledger had identified as part of the embezzlement scheme. Expressions darkened around the table. The Meridian Group had a reputation for aggressive restructuring and massive layoffs. After answering their questions as best I could without revealing what I knew, I concluded the meeting with genuine appreciation. "It has been my greatest professional honor to work with each of you. The innovations we've created together have improved countless lives, and nothing can take that away." As the team filed out, Thomas hung back. He closed the boardroom door, once we were alone, and spoke quietly. "Something's not adding up, Cassandra. You're not someone who gives up, especially not without a fight. What's really going on?" Thomas had been with the company since before my time, one of my father's first research hires. His integrity was unquestionable. For a moment, I considered confiding in him, but my father's warning about my poor ability to deceive stopped me. "Trust that I'm making the best decision under the circumstances, Thomas, and perhaps keep your resume updated in the coming months." His eyes narrowed as he processed my hint. "You think Lucas will run this place into the ground?" "I think significant changes are coming," I replied carefully. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lot to finish before I leave today." Back in my office, I found Diane fielding a barrage of calls from concerned employees, partners, and board members. I instructed her to direct all business inquiries to Lucas's team and to help schedule farewell meetings with my key reports for the afternoon. Around noon, my phone rang with a call from an unfamiliar number. "Cassandra Mitchell," I answered. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Rebecca Hamilton from Hammond Biotech. I understand you may be unexpectedly available soon. Our CEO would like to discuss a potential opportunity with you if you're interested." News of my ouster had reached competitors already. Hammond Biotech was our main rival, and their interest wasn't surprising. I had led the team that had developed our most profitable treatment for autoimmune disorders, beating Hammond to the patent by mere weeks. I appreciate the interest, Ms. Hamilton, but I'll be taking some time to consider my next steps. I'm not ready to discuss opportunities yet. Of course, the offer remains open whenever you're ready. By mid-afternoon, I had met with my direct reports, carefully avoiding any hints about what I suspected would soon happen to the company. Instead, I focused on expressing genuine appreciation for their work and subtly suggesting they prepare for turbulent times ahead. At 4 o'clock, as I was sorting through the last of my personal files, my office door swung open without a knock. Lucas strode in, followed by two men in expensive suits. Consultants from Meridian, I presumed. Cassandra. Lucas nodded, his tone falsely cordial. I thought we should discuss the transition in person. I remained seated, gesturing to the chairs across from my desk. Of course. Lucas didn't sit. Instead, he walked around my office, examining the awards and patents on the walls as if seeing them for the first time. Impressive collection, though technically these all belong to the company now. The physical awards, yes. The achievements they represent are still mine. One of the consultants cleared his throat impatiently, and Lucas got to the point. We've decided to accelerate your departure. Security will escort you out at the end of the day. Your personal items will be packed and delivered to your residence. So much for the 5-day transition period. I see. We'll also need you to sign these non-compete and confidentiality agreements. He nodded to the consultant, who placed a thick document on my desk. Standard procedure during leadership transitions. I glanced at the paperwork without touching it. These don't look standard to me, Lucas. This appears to be a lifetime non-compete covering the entire pharmaceutical industry, not just our specific market segments. Lucas's attempt at a business-like facade cracked slightly. Sign it, Cassandra, or we'll withhold your final compensation package. I don't think that would hold up in court. I pushed the document back across the desk. I'll have my attorney review these and respond appropriately. Lucas's expression hardened. Always difficult, aren't you? This could have been a smooth transition. Speaking of transitions, I said calmly, have you prepared for tomorrow's board meeting? I understand several major shareholders are concerned about your lack of industry experience. A flash of uncertainty crossed his face before he masked it with bravado. I have a team of advisors. The company will continue just fine without you. I stood up, gathering my remaining personal items into my briefcase. Well then, if there's nothing else, I'd like to say goodbye to my team before I leave. That won't be necessary, Lucas said coldly. Security is waiting to escort you out. We can't risk you taking company information or undermining the new leadership. I looked past Lucas to the office beyond, where Diane and several other colleagues had gathered, watching with concerned expressions. I gave them a reassuring smile before turning back to Lucas. You know, Lucas, our father built this company on 3 core principles: innovation, integrity, and responsibility to patients. I hope you remember that as you take the reins. Thanks, you for the business lesson, he said sarcastically. But I think I'll run things my way now. As the security guards entered my office, I felt strangely calm. The humiliation Lucas intended me to feel didn't materialize. Instead, knowing what I knew about his future, I felt almost sorry for him. I picked up my briefcase and the 2 boxes of personal items I'd prepared. I can escort myself out. As I walked through the open office, employees stopped what they were doing, many standing in silent support. Though no one dared speak against the new CEO, their expressions conveyed what words couldn't. I had earned their respect through years of leadership and mentorship, something Lucas could never simply inherit. The elevator ride to the lobby was silent, with Lucas and 1 security guard accompanying me. As we reached the ground floor, Lucas couldn't resist one final dig. "I never understood why my father thought so highly of you. I guess in the end, he didn't." I stepped out of the elevator and turned to face him. "You never really knew our father, Lucas, and I think that will become increasingly clear in the coming weeks." The confused expression on his face as the doors closed gave me my first genuine moment of satisfaction since the will reading. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the plaza in front of the building. I placed my boxes in my car and took one last look at the Mitchell Pharmaceuticals logo gleaming against the skyline. For 15 years, that logo had represented my purpose and identity. Now, I was free to redefine both. As I drove away, my phone rang through the car's speaker system. It was Michael, my cousin. "Cassie? I just heard what happened. Lucas had—" "You escorted out? That's outrageous." "It's fine, Michael. Actually, it's better this way." "Better? How could this possibly be better? He publicly humiliated you." I smiled to myself, thinking of the documents securely locked in my home safe. Let's just say I have a feeling things are going to work out exactly as they should. The first week after my departure from Mitchell Pharmaceuticals passed in a strange blur. After 15 years of 60-hour work weeks, conference calls during dinner, and middle-of-the-night emergencies with production lines, the sudden stillness of my days felt almost uncomfortable. I had become so accustomed to constant motion that sitting in my apartment with nowhere to be seemed foreign. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned colleagues, industry connections, and reporters seeking comments on the sudden leadership change at Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. I responded politely but vaguely to most, maintaining the professional discretion that had always characterized my career. It was Elena Diaz, the company's legal counsel, whose message I found most intriguing. Lucas brought in external auditors. Today, they're requesting access to financial records going back 7 years. Something strange is happening. So it had begun. My father's plan was already in motion, perhaps accelerated by Lucas's own actions. I merely replied, "Interesting. Keep me posted if you hear anything significant." On the 8th day of my unexpected freedom, I decided it was time to examine my father's gift more thoroughly. Spread across my dining room table were the legal documents establishing Cassandra Biomedical, including patents, international distribution rights, and several research initiatives I had believed were under Mitchell Pharmaceuticals' umbrella. My father had been systematically transferring the company's most valuable assets to this separate entity for years, always with proper compensation to Mitchell Pharmaceuticals, but structured in ways that wouldn't attract attention. The holding company owned exclusive rights to our 3 most profitable drug formulations and had controlling interest in our European and Asian distribution networks. According to the documents, Cassandra Biomedical had been operating as a silent partner to Mitchell Pharmaceuticals, collecting licensing fees that were then reinvested in research. The company had its own board of directors, respected industry figures I recognized, including my father's oldest friend, Dr. James Harrison, who had served as my unofficial mentor throughout my career. Among the papers was a sealed envelope, with instructions to open it 2 weeks after my father's passing. Today marked exactly 14 days since his funeral. With steady hands, I broke the seal and unfolded a letter written in my father's distinctive handwriting. "My dear Cassandra, by now you have discovered the foundation I've built for you. Cassandra Biomedical represents not just a significant financial asset, but the culmination of your work and vision. The board awaits your instructions as the new majority shareholder and CEO. I suggest beginning with a meeting at Harrison Laboratories next Tuesday at 10 a.m. James is expecting you. Before you take the helm, allow me to explain my actions more fully. When I married Vivian, I believed I had found happiness after years of loneliness following your mother's death. I was blind to her true character and motivations for far too long. By the time I discovered the financial discrepancies, you had become the heart and soul of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. I could not bear to taint your work with scandal. Nor could I confront Vivian and Lucas without risking the company's reputation and stability. The solution came to me gradually. I would separate the valuable assets, preserving your work and its benefits to patients worldwide, while allowing justice to take its natural course with those who had betrayed my trust. You may wonder why I couldn't simply tell you. The answer is painfully simple. You are forthright and honest to your core, just like your mother. You could never have maintained the necessary deception while continuing to work alongside those who were undermining everything you built. I know the public humiliation of the will reading and your removal from the company has been painful. Consider it the final sacrifice in service to something greater. From these ashes, you will build something remarkable, something truly yours, unencumbered by the past. All my love, Dad. I sat back, emotions washing over me in complex waves. Despite the vindication his words provided, I still felt the sting of having been kept in the dark, of being publicly humiliated as part of a plan I knew nothing about. Yet underlying this hurt was a growing appreciation for my father's foresight and the foundation he had created for my future. Next Tuesday. 5 days from now, I would meet with James Harrison and begin the next chapter. Until then, I needed to prepare. I spent the weekend researching the current status of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals, discovering that their stock had dropped nearly 20% since the announcement of my departure. Industry analysts were questioning Lucas's qualifications and expressing concern about the company's future direction. Several key researchers had already resigned, unwilling to work under uncertain leadership. On Monday morning, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened the door, I found Thomas Chen standing there, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Thomas," I said, genuinely surprised. "Come in." He stepped into my apartment, glancing around at the papers spread across my dining table before I could gather them. His eyes widened slightly, but he made no comment. "I resigned this morning," he said without preamble, "along with Sophia and half the research team." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied carefully. Thomas gave me a knowing look. "Are you? Because it seems like you expected something like this to happen." I gestured for him to sit on the sofa while I made coffee. "What's happening at Mitchell now?" "Chaos," he said simply. "Lucas has no idea how to run a pharmaceutical company. He's brought in consultants who are cutting costs in all the wrong places, alienating the research teams, and threatening the pipeline of new products." "And the auditors?" I asked casually, setting a mug of coffee in front of him. Thomas's expression sharpened. "How did you know about the auditors?" "They arrived suddenly last Thursday, demanding access to all financial records." Lucas seemed as surprised as everyone else. I maintained a neutral expression. "Just an educated guess. When new leadership takes over, audits often follow." "These weren't normal auditors, Cassandra. They had federal badges. So my father had indeed alerted the authorities, triggering an investigation that would reveal Vivian and Lucas's embezzlement. The wheels were turning faster than I had anticipated. "What do you think will happen?" I asked, testing how much Thomas had pieced together. He set down his coffee mug with deliberate care. "I think Mitchell Pharmaceuticals is in serious trouble. And I think you knew it would be, which is why you didn't fight your dismissal." I met his gaze steadily. "What if there were a way to preserve the important work we've been doing, regardless of what happens to Mitchell Pharmaceuticals?" "I'd say that sounds like something you would have prepared for," Thomas replied. "You've always been 10 steps ahead." I made a decision then, recognizing that Thomas's integrity and expertise would be invaluable in what was to come. "I have a meeting tomorrow that might interest you, if you're available." "With," he prompted, "James Harrison." Thomas's eyebrows rose. "Dr. Harrison hasn't been involved with Mitchell for years, not since your father bought out his shares. It seems there's a lot about my father's business dealings that I'm only now discovering," I said carefully. "Would you like to join me tomorrow and learn more?" Thomas studied me for a long moment before nodding. I think I would. After Thomas left, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Cassandra Mitchell, I answered. Ms. Mitchell, this is Special Agent Daniels with the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. We'd like to speak with you regarding some irregularities we've discovered at Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. I had been expecting this call. Of course, Agent Daniels. How can I help? We understand you served as COO until recently. We'd appreciate your insights into the company's financial structures and reporting systems. Would you be available to meet tomorrow? I have a prior engagement in the morning, but I could meet you at your offices in the afternoon around 2? That would be fine. Thank you for your cooperation. The following morning, Thomas met me outside Harrison Laboratories, a modest research facility in Cambridge that had once partnered with Mitchell Pharmaceuticals on early-stage drug development. James Harrison, now in his 70s, greeted us warmly at the entrance. Cassandra, he said, embracing me. You look more like your mother every time I see you. And Thomas, a pleasant surprise, though not entirely unexpected. He led us through the facility to a well-appointed conference room where 4 other people waited. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a renowned researcher who had developed breakthrough treatments for neurological disorders. Martin Walsh, former CFO of a major pharmaceutical conglomerate. Diane Lee, an intellectual property expert I had worked with on patent applications. And Rebecca Hamilton, the woman who had called me with a job offer from Hammond Biotech. Welcome to the board of Cassandra Biomedical, James announced, gesturing to the assembled group. We've been waiting for you to claim your rightful position. For the next 2 hours, James and the board briefed me on the current status of Cassandra Biomedical. The company existed primarily as a holding entity for intellectual property and distribution rights, with minimal operational structure. Its value lay in the patents and distribution networks my father had methodically transferred over the years. Your father created this company 5 years ago, James explained, when he first suspected financial improprieties at Mitchell. He structured it as your inheritance, though he maintained operational control until his passing. And now? I asked. Now you hold 70% of the shares, with the remaining 30% distributed among the board members and a trust for research funding, Martin replied. You're the majority owner and designated CEO if you choose to accept the position. Thomas, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. This is why you didn't fight Lucas for Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. You already owned the most valuable parts of it. I shook my head. I didn't know. My father kept this entirely secret from me until after his death. A necessary precaution, James said gently. Richard was concerned that if you knew, Vivian and Lucas might become suspicious. He needed to maintain the illusion that they were succeeding in their scheme until everything was in place. The question now, said Elena Vasquez, is what you want to do with this company. It could remain a holding entity, collecting licensing fees. Or it could become an operational pharmaceutical company in its own right, I finished, the possibilities suddenly crystallizing in my mind. Building on the foundation of the patents and distribution networks, but with a new vision. Rebecca. Hamilton nodded approvingly. That's why I reached out to you after your departure from Mitchell. Hammond Biotech was interested in acquiring Cassandra Biomedical, but we needed you at the helm. Now I see that your father ensured that would be the case. I'm not interested in selling, I said firmly. Nor did we expect you to be, Rebecca smiled. Which is why I resigned from Hammond yesterday to join your board. I believe in what this company could become under your leadership. As the meeting concluded, the board members expressed their confidence in my leadership and their commitment to helping build Cassandra Biomedical into an operational company. We agreed to reconvene in 1 week with initial strategic plans. Outside the laboratory, Thomas turned to me with newfound respect in his eyes. Your father was a brilliant man. He created the perfect revenge, justice for the embezzlers and a fresh start for you, built on the foundation of your own work. It's not about revenge, I replied, understanding my father's intentions more clearly now. It's about preserving what matters. The patients who depend on our medications, the research that can change lives, the team that made it all possible. Speaking of the team, Thomas said hesitantly, there are at least 24 key researchers and staff who have left or are leaving Mitchell, people loyal to you and your vision. I smiled, feeling truly optimistic for the first time since my father's death. Tell them to keep their schedules open. Cassandra Biomedical will be hiring very soon. Later that afternoon, I met with Agent Daniels and provided a detailed overview of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals' financial structures, carefully avoiding any mention of what I knew about the embezzlement scheme. My father's evidence would speak for itself through the forensic accounting investigation already underway. As I left the federal building, my phone buzzed with a text from Elena Diaz. Lucas arrested this afternoon. FBI confiscated computers and files. Company in turmoil. Stock suspended from trading. Justice was moving more swiftly than I had anticipated. I felt no vindictive pleasure at Lucas's downfall, only a somber recognition that actions have consequences, and that my father's plan had worked exactly as he had intended. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, reflecting on the extraordinary turn my life had taken. 2 weeks ago, I had stood in a lawyer's office, devastated by apparent betrayal. Tonight, I held the future of a pharmaceutical company in my hands, not one I had inherited or been given, but one built on the foundation of my own work and vision. Tomorrow would bring challenges: building an operational structure for Cassandra Biomedical, recruiting the right team, establishing new headquarters, managing the inevitable media attention when Mitchell Pharmaceuticals' collapse became public knowledge. But for the first time in 15 years, I felt genuinely excited about the path ahead. A path I would define on my own terms. The news of Lucas's arrest dominated the business headlines for days. Heir to pharmaceutical fortune charged with embezzlement. Mitchell Pharmaceuticals faces uncertain future amid fraud investigation. Former executive vindicated as stepbrother arrested for financial crimes. I avoided giving interviews, despite the constant requests flooding my inbox. This wasn't about public vindication, it was about building something meaningful from the ashes. 3 days after Lucas's arrest, Vivian was also taken into custody, charged as a co-conspirator in the embezzlement scheme. Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. Stock, which had resumed trading after a 2-day suspension, had lost over 60% of its value. Investors were fleeing, and the board of directors had called an emergency meeting to discuss bankruptcy protection. While Mitchell Pharmaceuticals imploded, I worked tirelessly to establish Cassandra Biomedical as a fully operational company. We secured office space in a modern building in Cambridge's biotech corridor, modest but functional headquarters that would allow us to grow organically. James Harrison had generously offered temporary lab space at his research facility until we could establish our own. By the end of the second week, we had assembled a core team of 35 employees, most former Mitchell staff who had resigned in the wake of the scandal. I was particularly pleased when Sophia Liu agreed to lead our research division, bringing with her 7 key scientists from Mitchell's most promising drug development programs. The irony, Sophia remarked during our first leadership meeting, is that we're essentially rebuilding Mitchell Pharmaceuticals, just with a different name and without the financial fraud. Not quite, I replied. We're building something better. Mitchell was founded on my father's vision, which was innovative for its time, but ultimately became constrained by tradition and compromised by corruption. Cassandra Biomedical will embody a new approach to pharmaceutical development, more collaborative, more transparent, and more focused on patient outcomes than profit margins. Ambitious, Thomas commented, especially in an industry not known for prioritizing patients over profits. Which is precisely why it's necessary, I countered, and why we're perfectly positioned to lead that change. We're starting fresh, with the best talent, key patents already secured, And distribution? Networks in place. We don't have shareholders demanding quarterly growth at any cost. We can build sustainable success on our own terms. The leadership team, Thomas, Sophia, Elena Vasquez, and our newly hired CFO, Martin Walsh, exchanged glances, a mixture of skepticism and excitement in their expressions. "I'm in," Martin said finally. "I've spent 30 years watching pharmaceutical companies compromise their missions for short-term gains. I'd like to be part of something different before I retire." "As am I," Elena agreed. "The research community has been waiting for a company willing to prioritize scientific integrity over marketing hype." The conversion of Cassandra Biomedical from holding company to operational entity happened with remarkable speed, fueled by the team's expertise and commitment. By the end of the first month, we had established provisional departments for research, development, regulatory affairs, and business operations. Our legal team worked diligently to ensure all transitions from Mitchell's intellectual property to Cassandra Biomedical's ownership were properly documented and defensible against any future challenges. Throughout this intense period of building, I maintained minimal contact with my former life. My apartment near Mitchell's headquarters had too many associations with my previous role, so I relocated to a temporary residence closer to our new offices. I politely declined social invitations from acquaintances curious about the scandal and my next steps. My focus remained entirely on establishing Cassandra Biomedical's foundation. 6 weeks after Lucas's arrest, I received an unexpected visitor at our still-developing headquarters. Aunt Eleanor, my father's sister, arrived unannounced, surveying our modest offices with apparent approval. "So, this is where you've landed," she said, embracing me with uncharacteristic warmth. "Your father would be proud." "You knew, didn't you?" I asked, guiding her into my office away from curious eyes. "About Richard's plan?" "Not all of it," she admitted, settling into a chair across from my desk. "He consulted me about establishing Cassandra Biomedical. I helped him identify board members, but he kept many details private. He was concerned that Vivian had people watching his close associates." "You could have warned me after his death," I pointed out, still feeling the sting of having been kept in the dark. Aunt Eleanor's expression softened. "I considered it, but I respected Richard's judgment. He believed your genuine shock at the will reading was essential to making Lucas and Vivian feel secure in their victory. If they suspected anything, they might have moved assets or destroyed evidence before the investigation could begin." I nodded slowly, acknowledging the logic even as I struggled with the emotional impact of having been used as an unwitting pawn, even for justified ends. "I came to deliver something," Eleanor continued, opening her handbag. "Richard left this with me, to be given to you once Cassandra Biomedical was operational." She handed me a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of interlocking leaves and flowers. I recognized it immediately. My mother's jewelry box, which had disappeared after her death. I'd assumed my father had stored it away too, painful a reminder of his loss. With slightly trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside was not jewelry, but a USB drive and a small golden key on a delicate chain. "The drive contains personal messages," Eleanor explained. "Things Richard wanted to share with you, but couldn't risk writing down while the plan was in motion. The key is symbolic. It belonged to your mother's studio, where she created her art. Richard always said her creativity was her greatest gift to you." I lifted the key, feeling its weight against my palm. I barely remember her studio. I was only 12 when she died. "She created extraordinary beauty there," Eleanor said softly. "Just as you're creating something meaningful here, from painful circumstances. The parallel wouldn't be lost on either of them." After Eleanor left, I connected the USB drive to my computer, discovering a series of video files dated over the past 5 years. With a deep breath, I clicked on the earliest one. My father's face appeared on screen, looking younger and healthier. than in my final memories of him. "Cassandra," he began, "if you're watching this, then everything has proceeded according to plan, and you're now leading Cassandra Biomedical. This is the first of several messages I've recorded to explain my actions and to share some thoughts about the company's potential future." For the next hour, I watched the progression of videos, listening as my father outlined his discovery of the embezzlement, his decision to protect the company's core assets, and his vision for what Cassandra Biomedical could become. The final video, recorded just weeks before his heart attack, was the most personal. "I know you must have felt betrayed by the will and everything that followed," he said, his face now showing the strain of his declining health. "I hope you can forgive me for not finding another way. Your integrity has always been your greatest strength, but in this situation, it meant I couldn't include you in the plan without risking everything." He paused, emotion briefly overwhelming him. "I want you to know how proud I am of the woman and leader you've become. Mitchell Pharmaceuticals succeeded largely because of your vision and dedication. Now, with Cassandra Biomedical, you have the opportunity to create something truly your own, without the constraints of the past or the burden of others' expectations." His final words stayed with me long after the video ended. Don't build this company in reaction to what happened at Mitchell. Don't let it be defined by proving something to those who underestimated you. Build it as an expression of your own values and vision. That's the legacy that matters. The next morning, I called an all-hands meeting of our now 50-person team. Standing before them in our unfinished conference room, folding chairs arranged in haphazard rows, I felt a clarity of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. "Many of you left secure positions at Mitchell Pharmaceuticals to join this uncertain venture," I began. "You took a risk on Cassandra Biomedical before we even had proper offices or a clearly articulated mission. Today, I want to share with you exactly what we're building together." For the next 30 minutes, I outlined my vision for the company, not as a reaction to Mitchell's downfall or a vehicle for personal vindication, but as a new model for pharmaceutical development. We would prioritize treatments for underserved medical conditions, maintain transparent financial practices, involve patient advocates in our development process, and implement sustainable pricing models that balanced accessibility with continued research funding. "This won't be easy," I acknowledged. "We'll face skepticism from an industry accustomed to different priorities. We'll be pressured to compromise our values for faster growth. There will be failures along with successes. But if we stay true to this vision, we have the opportunity to change not just our company, but the standards of our entire industry." The response was immediate and overwhelming, not raucous applause, but something more meaningful. Nods of commitment, expressions of determination, and thoughtful questions about implementation. These professionals hadn't joined Cassandra Biomedical merely to follow me or escape Mitchell's sinking ship. They had come because they believed in the possibility of a better approach to their life's work. As the meeting concluded and people returned to their tasks with renewed purpose, Thomas approached me with a bemused expression. "That wasn't the speech I expected," he admitted. "I thought you'd emphasize how we're going to prove Lucas and the Mitchell board wrong, show them what they lost when they pushed you out." I shook my head, my father's words fresh in my mind. "This isn't about proving anything to them. It's about creating something that matters, regardless of what happened before." "Your father would approve," Thomas said quietly. "I know," I replied, fingering the golden key I now wore around my neck. "He already did." That afternoon, I received a call from James Harrison with unexpected news. Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. Board of directors had approached him about a potential acquisition of what remained of the company's assets by Cassandra Biomedical. "They're desperate," James explained. "The fraud investigation has paralyzed operations, key personnel have departed, and shareholders are threatening lawsuits. They see a deal with Cassandra Biomedical as their only hope for salvaging anything." I felt a strange absence of triumph at this news. The company I had helped build for 15 years was collapsing, yet I found no satisfaction in its downfall. What mattered now was ensuring that valuable research wasn't lost, that patients dependent on Mitchell's medications weren't left vulnerable, and that innocent employees didn't suffer unnecessarily for Lucas and Vivian's crimes. "Set up a meeting," I told James. "Not to gloat or exact revenge, but to discuss a responsible transition that protects patients and preserves valuable research." The following week, I sat across a conference table from Mitchell's remaining board members, older men who had watched my career from its beginning, who had approved my promotions and praised my accomplishments, and who had ultimately accepted Lucas's leadership without question. Their discomfort was palpable as I entered the room, composed and confident, now negotiating from a position of strength. "Gentlemen," I began, "let's discuss how we can ensure that Mitchell's patients continue receiving their medications without interruption, and how the company's research projects can continue under new management." For 4 hours, we negotiated terms that would allow Cassandra Biomedical to acquire Mitchell's remaining valuable assets while leaving the legal liabilities with the original corporate entity. By the end, we had outlined a framework that would preserve jobs for hundreds of Mitchell employees, maintain critical drug production, and transfer promising research initiatives to our growing operation. As the meeting concluded, Bradford Wells, the eldest board member who had served alongside my father for decades, asked to speak with me privately. "I owe you an apology, Cassandra," he said once we were alone. "I knew your contributions to Mitchell were irreplaceable. I suspected Lucas lacked the necessary experience and integrity, yet I remained silent when your father's will was read, and again when Lucas pushed you out. I studied him, seeing not the powerful corporate director, but an aging man confronting his own moral compromise." "Why?" I asked simply. "Fear, primarily," he admitted. "Fear of losing my position, my standing, my financial security. The older I've gotten, the more risk-averse I've become, to my shame." I nodded, understanding more than he realized about how systems perpetuate themselves through such quiet compromises. "Thank you for your honesty, Bradford. It's never too late to choose differently." As I left Mitchell Pharmaceuticals' headquarters for what would likely be the final time, I felt no desire to look back. The building that had once represented my greatest professional achievement now seemed like a necessary step in a longer journey, one that was just beginning. 3 months after the meeting with Mitchell's board, the acquisition of their salvageable assets was complete. What once seemed impossible had become reality. Cassandra Biomedical had absorbed the viable portions of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals, preserving critical research programs, manufacturing capabilities, and, most importantly, jobs for over 300 employees who had faced uncertain futures. Our company now occupied a renovated industrial space in Cambridge's Innovation District, an open collaborative environment that physically embodied our organizational philosophy. Glass-walled laboratories allowed visibility into our research activities. Conference rooms featured round tables rather than hierarchical arrangements. My office door remained open whenever possible, a deliberate departure from the executive isolation I had observed throughout my career. The transition hadn't been without challenges. Integrating teams with different working styles and expectations required patience and clear communication. Some former Mitchell executives struggled to adapt to our flatter organizational structure and emphasis on collaborative decision-making. Others embraced the change with enthusiasm, liberated from constrictive corporate protocols that had stifled innovation. One Tuesday morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to review quarterly projections before our leadership meeting. As I crossed the main atrium, I noticed a young researcher named Priya working intently at one of the collaborative stations, surrounded by data visualizations and molecular models. "You're here early," I commented, pausing beside her workstation. She looked up, momentarily startled. "Ms. Mitchell?" "Yes, I've been exploring an alternative synthesis pathway for the ARN-247 compound. The standard approach has yield issues, but I think there's a more efficient route. ARN-247 was a promising treatment for certain autoimmune disorders, but manufacturing challenges had hampered its development at Mitchell. I glanced at her models, impressed by the elegant solution she proposed. Have you shared this with Dr. Liu? I asked, referring to Sophia, who led our research division. Priya hesitated. Not yet. At Mitchell, junior researchers were discouraged from proposing alternatives to established protocols. I wanted to have comprehensive data before speaking up. That's not how we operate here, I assured her. Good ideas can come from anywhere in the organization. I'd like you to present this at today's research review. Her eyes widened. Really? But I've only been here 2 months, and I'm not even a team lead. Which gives you a fresh perspective we need, I replied. Innovation doesn't respect hierarchy, Priya. Neither should we. Later that day, I watched with satisfaction as Priya presented her findings to the research team. Her alternative synthesis method promised to increase yields by 40% while reducing production costs substantially. The senior scientists asked thoughtful questions and offered constructive feedback, treating her as a valued colleague rather than a subordinate. As the meeting concluded, Thomas caught my eye, a knowing smile playing at his lips. That wouldn't have happened at Mitchell, he observed quietly. No, I agreed. And that's precisely the point. This small interaction represented exactly what I hoped to cultivate at Cassandra Biomedical, an environment where merit trumped tenure, where innovation was encouraged regardless of source, and where contribution was valued over credentials. The contrast with Mitchell's rigid hierarchies and risk-averse culture couldn't have been clearer. That evening, I had dinner with James Harrison, who had become both mentor and friend during Cassandra Biomedical's rapid growth. We met at a quiet restaurant near Harvard Square, away from the industry circles where we might be recognized, and interrupted. You've accomplished remarkable things in a short time, James commented, studying me over his glass of wine. The industry is taking notice. We still have a long way to go, I replied. Changing how a pharmaceutical company operates is one thing. Changing industry standards is quite another. James chuckled. Always focused on the horizon rather than how far you've come. Do you ever allow yourself to appreciate what you've built, Cassandra? The question gave me pause. In the whirlwind of establishing Cassandra Biomedical as a functioning entity, navigating the Mitchell acquisition, and implementing our vision for a different kind of pharmaceutical company, I had given little thought to personal satisfaction or accomplishment. I'm not sure I know how, I admitted. For so long, my identity was tied to working harder, pushing further, proving myself within the Mitchell framework. Even now, I'm focused on what we need to achieve next rather than what we've already done. That drive has served you well, James acknowledged. But there's value in recognizing milestones. Your father understood that. It's why he documented his plans so meticulously, why he left those videos for you to find. He wanted you to see not just the destination, but the journey. Speaking of journeys, I said, deliberately changing the pie. Subject: the clinical trials for our GBN-135 compound are showing promising early results. If they continue, we could be looking at a breakthrough treatment for peripheral neuropathy within 2 years. James allowed the diversion, and we spent the remainder of dinner discussing research developments and strategic opportunities. It was familiar territory, comfortable and energizing in its focus on concrete progress rather than emotional reflection. As we parted ways outside the restaurant, James squeezed my hand. Your father wanted more for you than professional success, Cassandra. Don't forget that the company bears your name for a reason. It's meant to be an expression of your values, not just your expertise. His words lingered with me during the cab ride home. My father had indeed been deliberate in naming the company after me, rather than himself or some abstract pharmaceutical terminology. In those early videos, he had emphasized that Cassandra Biomedical should represent more than a business entity. It should embody a philosophy and approach that reflected my authentic leadership style and values. Had I fully embraced that opportunity? In the rush to establish operational systems, secure regulatory approvals, and position ourselves in the marketplace, had I neglected the more fundamental aspect of shaping organizational culture and values? The next morning, I asked my assistant to clear my calendar for 2 hours. I needed uninterrupted time to articulate something that had been forming in my mind since James's comments. A comprehensive statement of principles that would guide Cassandra, Biomedical's growth and decision-making moving forward. By lunchtime, I had drafted what I called our foundational commitments, 5 core principles that would serve as touchstones for every aspect of our operations. 1. Patient-centered innovation. We develop treatments based on unmet medical needs, not merely market potential. 2. Scientific integrity. We report all research findings transparently, whether they support our hypotheses or not. 3. Accessible pricing. We implement tiered pricing models that balance sustainable business operations with medication accessibility. 4. Collaborative excellence. We foster environments where the best ideas flourish regardless of their source within the organization. 5. Long-term vision. We make decisions based on lasting impact rather than quarterly performance metrics. These weren't merely aspirational statements to be framed on a wall and forgotten. Each principle would be tied to specific metrics and accountability systems woven into performance evaluations and reflected in our compensation structures. They would become the DNA of our organization, informing everything from research priorities to hiring decisions. I shared the draft with our leadership team that afternoon, inviting their input and refinement. The ensuing discussion was both challenging and invigorating, as each executive considered how these principles would impact their departments and questioned whether our current systems adequately supported them. "These are ambitious standards," Martin observed, his financial expertise making him particularly attuned to potential tensions between ideals and market realities. Especially the commitment to accessible pricing. Our investors will have questions, which is precisely why we've structured our funding to maintain operational control, I replied. We've been deliberate about selecting investors who understand and support our approach. Those who expect traditional pharmaceutical profit margins wouldn't be compatible partners anyway. I'm more concerned about measuring patient-centered innovation, Sophia added. How do we quantify that in a meaningful way? That's exactly the right question, I acknowledged. We'll need robust frameworks for each principle, ways to evaluate whether our actions truly align with our stated values. By the end of the 2-hour session, we had made significant progress in refining the principles and identifying metrics for each. More importantly, the leadership team had taken ownership of the vision, contributing insights that strengthened its practical application across the organization. The following week, we presented the foundational commitments to the entire company during an all-hands meeting. Rather than a top-down proclamation, we framed it as a collective commitment, one that every employee would help implement and refine over time. These principles aren't abstract concepts, I explained to the assembled staff. They're practical guides for daily decisions at every level of our organization. When facing a difficult choice, these commitments should provide clear direction. To demonstrate this practical application, we conducted a real-time exercise, presenting complex scenarios drawn from actual pharmaceutical industry dilemmas and asking small groups to apply our principles to develop potential solutions. The engagement was immediate and enthusiastic, with employees from different departments collaborating to navigate ethical and strategic challenges. As I observed the interactions, I noticed a researcher named David, recently hired from a competitor, looking particularly thoughtful. "You seem contemplative," I commented when I joined his group. "I am," he admitted. I've worked for 3 major pharmaceutical companies over the past decade, and not one has explicitly addressed these kinds of ethical questions in operational terms. Usually there's vague corporate language about integrity and patience. First, but day-to-day decisions are driven entirely by financial metrics. And you're skeptical that we'll be different? I asked, genuinely interested in his perspective. I'm cautiously optimistic, he replied. The fact that we're having this conversation at all is significant. The real test will come when these principles require difficult trade-offs, when doing the right thing comes with a cost. You're absolutely right, I agreed. Words are easy. Implementation is what matters. That's why we're building these principles into our operational systems and decision-making frameworks, not just our mission statement. David's perspective represented a healthy skepticism that I welcomed. Transforming. Industry practices required more than bold declarations. It demanded consistent execution, especially when faced with competitive pressures and financial constraints. In the weeks that followed, we began implementing practical applications of our foundational commitments. We established a patient advisory council that would provide input on research priorities and clinical trial designs. We developed a transparent pricing framework that explicitly factored in accessibility alongside research investment and operational sustainability. We created cross-functional innovation teams that included employees from all levels of the organization. 6 months after establishing our foundational commitments, we faced our first major test when preliminary data from a Phase 2 clinical trial showed that our most promising cardiovascular treatment was less effective than anticipated. The investment in this compound had been substantial, and market expectations were high. I gathered our senior team to discuss the findings and determine our next steps. Under traditional pharmaceutical practices, companies often delayed reporting, disappointing results or emphasized secondary endpoints that showed more favorable outcomes. What's our approach here? I asked, deliberately opening the discussion rather than directing it. The team exchanged glances before Thomas spoke. Our commitment to scientific integrity means we report these findings promptly and completely, even though it will disappoint investors and likely impact our stock value. But we should also demonstrate our commitment to patient-centered innovation, Sophia added. The data shows the compound is still beneficial for a subset of patients with specific genetic markers. We should redirect our research to understand why it works for them, even if that means a narrower market. I nodded, feeling a profound satisfaction in hearing our principles reflected in their analysis without my prompting. Exactly. We'll issue a complete report of our findings, pivot our research focus to the responsive patient subgroup, and communicate transparently with stakeholders about both the disappointment and the opportunity. The announcement did indeed trigger a temporary dip in our stock price, but the response from the scientific community and patient advocacy groups was overwhelmingly positive. Our transparency stood in stark contrast to industry norms, earning respect even from competitors. More importantly, this decision reinforced to our employees that our foundational commitments weren't merely aspirational, they guided real choices, with real consequences. The principle of scientific integrity had been tested and upheld, setting a precedent for future challenges. As I prepared for bed that evening, I found myself fingering the golden key I still wore around my neck. My mother's studio key that Aunt Eleanor had delivered months ago. I had kept it as a talisman of sorts, a connection to my parents and their respective legacies, but I had never sought out the actual studio it once opened. Perhaps it was time to explore that connection more fully, to understand not just the professional legacy my father had constructed so carefully, but also the creative heritage my mother had left behind. Just as Cassandra Biomedical was becoming more than a business entity, perhaps I needed to recognize that I was more than a CEO. I was also my parents' daughter, with dimensions beyond professional accomplishment waiting to be explored. 1 year after the establishment of Cassandra Biomedical, I found myself at a crossroads that had nothing to do with business strategy or pharmaceutical innovations. The company was thriving, our foundational commitments were proving both viable and valuable, and our first independently developed treatment had received regulatory approval ahead of schedule. Yet amid this professional success, I recognized an emptiness in my personal life that no corporate achievement could fill. The golden key I wore daily had become a persistent reminder of unexplored dimensions, a symbol of my mother's creative legacy that I had acknowledged but not embraced. On a crisp autumn Saturday, I finally decided to visit the address listed in my father's records as my mother's studio. The building was in Cambridge's Arts District, an area that had gentrified considerably since my childhood, but still maintained pockets of creative energy. The 3-story brick structure had been converted into artists' lofts decades ago, with my mother's space occupying half of the top floor. I stood outside for several minutes, gathering my courage. Though I had faced boardrooms full of skeptical investors and navigated complex corporate transitions without hesitation, this personal exploration felt considerably more daunting. Finally, I entered the building and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The studio door was unmarked except for a small brass plate bearing the number 307. With slightly trembling hands, I inserted the golden key into the lock, surprised when it turned smoothly despite years of disuse. Evidently, my father had maintained the space all this time, paying rent on a studio that had stood empty for over 20 years. As the door swung open, I was greeted by the unexpected scent of lemon and beeswax. Someone had been caring for this space. Sunlight streamed through large north-facing windows, illuminating a studio that appeared frozen in time, yet impeccably preserved. Canvas-covered easels stood ready for use. Brushes were arranged meticulously in pottery containers. A large work table dominated the center of the room, its surface clean but marked with the colorful stains of artistic creation. On the walls hung dozens of my mother's paintings, landscapes, abstracts, and portraits I had never seen before. I recognized my father's much younger face in one, his expression more open and joyful than I could remember seeing in life. Another captured a young girl, myself at perhaps 5 years old, absorbed in building a structure with colored blocks, my expression intent with concentration. She came here every day, even when she was ill. I turned sharply to find an elderly woman standing in the doorway. Her silver hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and paint stained her hands despite the clean smock she wore. "I'm Gloria Thompson," she continued, stepping into the studio. "I had the studio next door when your mother was alive, and I've kept an eye on this place since then. Your father asked me to maintain it exactly as she left it." "You're the one who's been cleaning," I realized. "Thank you." Gloria nodded. "Richard came by every month for years, just to sit here among her work. After his health began failing, he arranged for a service to keep it dusted, but I still check in weekly. I've been wondering when you might finally use that key." I moved slowly around the studio, touching brushes my mother had held, examining paintings she had created. I barely remember her working here. I was so young when she died. "But she remembered you," Gloria replied, moving to a cabinet in the corner. "She kept meticulous journals of her creative process, and you feature prominently in them." She withdrew a stack of leather-bound books. "She saw something special in you from the beginning, a way of seeing patterns and connections. That reminded her of her own artistic perception, though she believed you would express it differently." I accepted the journals with reverence, opening the top one to see my mother's flowing handwriting filling the pages, interspersed with small sketches and color studies. "I had no idea these existed." "Your father couldn't bear to take them home after she died, but he couldn't part with them either, so they remained here, along with everything else." Gloria gestured around the studio. "He always said that someday you would need this space and everything in it, though I don't think he knew exactly why or when." For the next several hours, I sat in my mother's studio, reading her journals and studying her artwork with Gloria, occasionally offering context or memories. I discovered a woman far more complex and insightful than the hazy recollections of my childhood had preserved. A dedicated artist who found profound meaning in both her creative work and her family life. One journal entry particularly struck me. Watched C building with her blocks today, creating structures unlike anything the set was designed for. She doesn't follow the suggested models, instead seeing possibilities in the pieces that even I wouldn't imagine. Richard thinks she'll be a scientist or engineer with this mindset, but I see something more integrated. An ability to combine analytical precision with creative vision. Whatever path she chooses, this capacity to reimagine existing elements into new forms will serve her well. My mother had observed in my childhood play the very qualities that had allowed me to transform Mitchell Pharmaceuticals and establish Cassandra Biomedical with its unique approach. She had recognized my essential nature before I could possibly understand it myself. As evening approached, Gloria excused herself, leaving me alone in the studio with a new understanding of both my mother and myself. Before departing, she pressed a key into my hand, a duplicate she had kept for her caretaking duties. "This space has been waiting for you," she said simply. "Now it's yours to use however you need." After she left, I continued exploring, opening drawers and cabinets to discover art supplies still in usable condition, sketchbooks filled with preliminary studies, and photographs documenting my mother's creative journey. In one drawer, I found a small wooden box containing letters my father had written to her early in their relationship. Passionate, articulate expressions of love and admiration that revealed a side of him I had never known. By the time I reluctantly locked the studio and left, night had fallen. I walked through Cambridge's streets feeling fundamentally altered, as if pieces of my identity that had been missing were finally falling into place. I was not merely Richard Mitchell's daughter, who had proven herself in business, nor just the CEO of an innovative pharmaceutical company. I was also Catherine Mitchell's daughter, inheritor of an artistic legacy and creative perspective I had never fully claimed. The following morning, I awakened with unprecedented clarity about changes needed in both my professional and personal life. I had been pouring all my energy into Cassandra Biomedical, defining myself exclusively through its success. While the company represented an important expression of my values and vision, it couldn't constitute my entire identity. Over the next month, I made several significant adjustments to my approach. First, I delegated more operational responsibility to our capable leadership team, creating space for strategic thinking and personal development. Thomas Chen stepped into an expanded role as Chief Operating Officer, overseeing daily operations while I focused on long-term vision and external relationships. Second, I established boundaries around my time, no longer allowing work to consume evenings and weekends. I began spending Saturday mornings in my mother's studio, not attempting to paint as she had, but using the space for reflection and creative thinking about challenges facing Cassandra Biomedical and the broader healthcare ecosystem. Third, I initiated a personal project that had been forming in my mind since discovering my mother's journals. A program integrating arts and sciences for children from underserved communities. Working with educators and artists, we developed workshops that taught scientific concepts through artistic expression, nurturing the integrated thinking my mother had observed in me. This project, which I funded personally rather than through Cassandra Biomedical, flourished quickly, gaining attention from educational institutions and community organizations. The joy I found in watching children discover connections between seemingly disparate fields reminded me of something essential I had forgotten in years of corporate focus. Innovation thrives at intersections, not in silos. These changes inevitably affected my leadership at Cassandra Biomedical. Rather than diminishing my effectiveness, my broader perspective enhanced it. I approached problems with fresh insights, often drawing unexpected parallels between artistic concepts and pharmaceutical Challenges. Our research teams benefited from workshops on creative thinking techniques, adapted from artistic disciplines. Cross-functional collaboration strengthened as we incorporated diverse perspectives into problem-solving processes. 6 weeks after my first visit to the studio, I invited the entire leadership team to meet there rather than our corporate conference room. Their surprise at the venue quickly transformed into engagement as I explained how this space represented an important part of my heritage and thinking. My mother was an artist who saw patterns and possibilities others missed, I told them as they examined her paintings with interest. Without realizing it, I've applied similar perceptual skills to our work in pharmaceuticals, seeing connections between research findings that might appear unrelated, envisioning how organizational I guided them through an exercise using artistic materials to represent challenges we faced in our current research pipeline. The tactile, visual approach unlocked new conversations and perspectives, particularly from team members who typically remained quiet in traditional meetings. This is why you see things differently than anyone at Mitchell ever did, Sophia observed as we concluded the session. You're not just thinking like a pharmaceutical executive, you're thinking like an artist and a scientist simultaneously. Her observation crystallized something I had been gradually understanding since discovering my mother's studio. My strength lay not in conforming to industry expectations, but in integrating diverse modes of thought. My father had recognized this quality and positioned me to express it through Cassandra Biomedical. My mother had identified it decades earlier in my childhood play. This integration of personal insight with professional purpose accelerated Cassandra Biomedical's development in unexpected ways. Our research methodologies evolved to incorporate more diverse perspectives and unconventional approaches. Our corporate culture became known for psychological safety that encouraged exploration and risk-taking within ethical boundaries. Our patient engagement expanded to include artistic expressions of medical experiences that informed treatment, development. 3 months after my first visit to the studio, I received an unexpected communication from an unlikely source. Lucas Bennett, my stepbrother, had completed his preliminary hearing for the embezzlement charges and was awaiting trial, currently released on bail with travel restrictions. His letter arrived at my home address rather than the office, handwritten on plain paper rather than the expensive stationery he had always preferred. The contents surprised me even more than its existence. Cassandra, I've had considerable time to reflect on my actions and their consequences. While my legal team advises against any admissions that might affect my case, I find myself needing to acknowledge the truth, at least to you. I was never the person our father believed me to be. From the beginning, my mother encouraged me to present a version of myself that would secure my position in your father's life and legacy. The embezzlement began as her idea, though I willingly participated and eventually took the lead. What I didn't understand until recently was the damage my actions caused beyond financial loss, the undermining of a company that helps people, the betrayal of employees who depended on Mitchell Pharmaceuticals for their livelihoods, the squandering of research that could improve lives. I don't expect forgiveness, nor am I seeking leniency. I simply wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I've caused, and I understand why your father ultimately chose to protect his company's true legacy through you, Lucas. I read the letter several times, searching for manipulation or hidden agenda but finding only what appeared to be genuine remorse. Whether this represented true character growth or merely the consequence of being caught, I couldn't determine. Nor was it my responsibility to judge. After careful consideration, I wrote a brief response. Lucas, thank you for your letter. Self-awareness is a difficult and valuable achievement, regardless of the circumstances that prompt it. Whatever the legal outcome of your case, I hope you find a way forward that allows you to create value rather than extract it, to build something meaningful rather than diminish what others have built. Cassandra. I sent the letter without expectation of further communication. His journey and redemption, if possible, were his own to navigate. My focus remained on building Cassandra Biomedical into the company I envisioned, one that honored both my father's business acumen and my mother's creative perception. The integration of these dual legacies became most apparent in our approach to a challenging research setback involving a promising treatment for early-stage Alzheimer's. Initial trials showed limited efficacy, disappointing our research team that had invested 3 years in development. Rather than abandoning the compound entirely, the standard industry response, or continuing down the same research path despite discouraging results, an equally common but wasteful approach, I gathered our research leaders in my mother's studio for a full-day reimagining session. Surrounded by her artwork and equipped with both scientific data and creative materials, we deconstructed our assumptions about the treatment mechanism. By midday, Sophia had identified a pattern in patient responses that suggested our compound might be effective not for Alzheimer's, but for a specific type of inflammatory condition that often co-presents with cognitive decline. We've been asking the wrong question, she realized, studying both the data visualizations and the abstract representations we had created. Instead of, how can this compound treat Alzheimer's? We should be asking, what is this compound actually? Doing that might benefit patients? This perspective shift, seeing what was actually happening rather than what we had intended to happen, led to a complete reorientation of the research program. 6 months later, preliminary trials for the EI. Inflammatory condition showed promising results, potentially opening treatment pathways for an underserved patient population. As I observed our team's evolving approach to challenges, I recognized the emergence of a distinctive Cassandra biomedical methodology, one that integrated rigorous scientific analysis with creative reimagining of possibilities. We were becoming known in the industry not just for our ethical commitments, but for our unique problem-solving approach that often found value where others saw only failure. This integration of analytical precision with creative vision, exactly what my mother had observed in my childhood block building, had become our corporate signature. In finding my personal balance between these inherited legacies, I had helped shape an organizational identity that differentiated us in an industry typically resistant to innovation in its fundamental approaches. The golden key I wore daily transformed from a reminder of unexplored dimensions to a symbol of integration achieved, not just between my parents' diverse legacies, but between professional accomplishment and personal fulfillment, between scientific rigor and artistic insight, between the person I had been trained to be and the person I was discovering I actually was. 18 months after founding Cassandra Biomedical, I received an invitation that would test both our company's foundations and my personal resolve. The American Pharmaceutical Innovation Summit, the industry's most prestigious annual gathering, requested that I deliver the keynote address. The topic: Reimagining Pharmaceutical Development for the 21st Century. This invitation represented a significant milestone. The summit typically featured CEOs from established pharmaceutical giants with decades of industry dominance. For Cassandra Biomedical, a relative newcomer despite our rapid growth, to receive such recognition suggested our approach was gaining traction beyond our immediate business circles. "This is extraordinary," Thomas remarked when I shared the invitation during our leadership meeting, "particularly given how openly we've criticized traditional industry practices." "That's precisely why they've invited me," I replied, having considered the subtext carefully. "They're either acknowledging that our model has merit, or they're offering me enough rope to hang myself professionally." Martin, ever pragmatic, raised an eyebrow. "Most likely both. The industry recognizes that public trust in pharmaceutical companies has reached historic lows. Having you speak allows them to appear open to reform without actually committing to change." Regardless of their motivation, Elena interjected, this platform offers unprecedented visibility for our approach. The audience includes regulators, research institutions, patient advocacy groups, and global health organizations, not just industry competitors. I nodded, already envisioning how to leverage this opportunity. I'll accept, but on one condition. I want to present not just our vision, but our preliminary outcomes data. By summit time, we'll have 18 months of operations under our foundational commitments, with measurable results we can share. The team exchanged glances, recognizing both the opportunity and risk in this approach. Presenting actual performance data would move beyond philosophical positions to evidence-based arguments for our model's viability. We should be particularly transparent about the challenges and setbacks, Sophia suggested. Nothing would undermine our credibility more than presenting a sanitized success story. Agreed, I said. Complete transparency, including where we've struggled to implement our principles. If we're advocating for industry transformation, we need to acknowledge its genuine difficulties. As the leadership team outlined what data we should gather and how to present it effectively, I found myself reflecting on how far we'd come from those first uncertain days after my departure from Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. We had established not just a functioning company, but a working alternative to traditional pharmaceutical development, one that balanced innovation with accessibility, profit with purpose. The weeks leading up to the summit were filled with meticulous preparation. Our research team compiled comprehensive data on how our patient-centered approach had influenced development priorities and outcomes. Our finance department documented our tiered pricing model's impact on both revenue and medication accessibility. Our operations team analyzed how our collaborative structure affected innovation timelines compared to industry standards. The night before my keynote, I retreated to my hotel room in Chicago, reviewing my presentation one final time. The data told a compelling story. Our approach had yielded 3 approved treatments in 18 months, with development costs averaging 23% below industry standards. Our accessible pricing strategy had resulted in only 8% lower profit margins than competitors while making our medications available to significantly more patients. Our transparency in reporting research findings, both positive and negative, had earned unprecedented trust from regulatory agencies, streamlining approval processes, yet I felt oddly unsettled. The presentation was factually impeccable, but somehow incomplete. It demonstrated that our model was financially viable and operationally efficient, but it failed to convey the deeper purpose driving our approach. I stepped onto the balcony of my hotel room, gazing across the Chicago skyline as I contemplated what was missing. The golden key around my neck caught the moonlight, reminding me of my mother's studio and the integration of analytical and creative, thinking that had become so central to our methodology. With sudden clarity, I understood the gap in my presentation. I was approaching it as a business case study when it was actually a story of transformation, not just of a company, but of an entire approach to developing life-saving medications. The data supported our argument, but the human impact gave it meaning. I returned to my laptop and began restructuring the presentation, weaving patient stories alongside the data points, highlighting the researchers whose innovations had flourished in our collaborative environment, acknowledging the challenges we'd faced when our principles required difficult trade-offs. By 3 a.m., I had transformed a compelling business presentation into a human narrative of reimagining possibility. The summit's main hall was filled beyond capacity the following morning. Industry executives occupied the front rows, their expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed skepticism. Behind them sat researchers, regulators, healthcare providers, and patient advocates, a diverse audience representing every facet of the pharmaceutical ecosystem. As I was introduced, I noticed several familiar faces in the audience. James Harrison sat near the front, offering an encouraging nod. My Aunt Eleanor had traveled from Philadelphia to show support. Most surprisingly, Bradford Wells, The former Mitchell board member who had apologized for his silence during my dismissal was present, his expression one of genuine interest. The pharmaceutical industry stands at a crossroads, I began, setting aside the conventional thank you formalities. Public trust has eroded to historic lows. Medication costs have become prohibitive for many patients. Research priorities are determined more by market potential than medical need. These challenges aren't merely public relations problems to be managed. They represent fundamental questions about our industry's purpose and practices. For the next 45 minutes, I presented Cassandra Biomedical's alternative approach, systematically addressing how our foundational commitments translated into concrete operational practices. I shared both our successes and failures, emphasizing that transformation required continuous learning and adaptation, rather than rigid adherence to predetermined methods. The data demonstrates that our approach is financially sustainable, I concluded, displaying our comparative performance metrics. But numbers alone don't capture why this matters. Let me introduce you to someone who can speak to the human impact. The audience murmured in surprise as I welcomed Elena Vasquez to the stage, not in her capacity as our board member, but as the grandmother of Sophia, a 7-year-old girl whose rare neurological condition had been among our first treatment targets. With quiet dignity, Elena shared how traditional pharmaceutical companies had deemed Sophia's condition too rare to justify development costs. Cassandra Biomedical's patient-centered approach had led us to prioritize the treatment despite its limited market potential, resulting in a therapy that had significantly improved Sophia's quality of life. This isn't charity, I emphasized as Elena concluded her moving testimony. Sophia's treatment is financially sustainable within our model. The choice to develop it wasn't philanthropy. It was a different calculation of value that considers human impact alongside profit potential. The silence that followed was profound. I had deliberately challenged the industry's fundamental assumptions about how development decisions should be made, backed by evidence that an alternative approach could succeed both medically and financially. When the applause finally came, it started not from the executives in the front rows, but from the healthcare providers and patient advocates in the middle section, the people who witnessed daily how the industry's traditional priorities affected patient care. Their response was not merely polite appreciation, but genuine enthusiasm for the possibility of systemic change. The Q&A session that followed was intense, with industry leaders raising pointed questions about scalability, investor expectations, and competitive pressures. I addressed each challenge directly, acknowledging legitimate concerns while refusing to accept that the status quo represented the only viable approach. Your model might work for a company of your size, argued Gerald Thornton, CEO of one of the largest pharmaceutical conglomerates. But it's simply not feasible for an organization with shareholders expecting consistent quarterly growth and multiple product lines to maintain. That assumption deserves examination, I countered. Several elements of our approach, collaborative research structures, transparent reporting of findings, patient involvement in development priorities, could be implemented by companies of any size. The question isn't whether transformation is possible, but whether leadership has the vision and commitment to pursue it. As the session concluded, summit organizers announced that breakout discussions would continue throughout the afternoon, with Cassandra Biomedical team members available to share specific aspects of our methodology in greater detail. The response exceeded all expectations, with standing room only attendance at each session. During a brief break between discussions, Bradford Wells approached me, his expression thoughtful. Remarkable presentation, Cassandra. You've given the industry much to consider. Thank you, Bradford. I'm surprised to see you here. I've been following Cassandra Biomedical's development with great interest, he replied. After our last conversation about choosing differently, I've been reassessing my own role in perpetuating systems that may not serve patients optimally. Any conclusions? I asked. I've joined the board of the Patient Voice Initiative, he said, referring to an advocacy organization pushing for greater patient involvement in pharmaceutical development. My industry experience provides useful perspective, and their mission aligns with much of what you presented today. This unexpected evolution in Bradford's thinking represented exactly the kind of ripple effect I had hoped our approach might generate, inspiring individuals within traditional structures to reconsider established practices and advocate for change from within. The summit's final reception that evening became an impromptu strategy session, with researchers, regulators, and even some industry executives engaging in substantive discussions about implementing elements of our approach within their organizations. I moved through these conversations, connecting people with shared interests and offering practical insights from our experience. Near the end of the evening, James Harrison found me by the windows overlooking the Chicago River. "You've started something significant today," he observed. "The conversations I'm hearing go beyond polite interest to genuine engagement with your ideas." "It's encouraging," I agreed, "though I'm under no illusion that the industry will transform overnight." "Transformation never happens overnight," James replied. "It occurs through persistent demonstration of better alternatives, which is precisely what Cassandra Biomedical provides. You're not just advocating for change, you're proving it's possible." As we spoke, my phone vibrated with an incoming message from Sophia. "Emergency at the lab. Call as soon as possible." I excused myself to find a quiet corner, concern mounting as I dialed Sophia's number. Her voice was tense when she answered. "We've been hacked," she said without preamble. "Someone infiltrated our research database and accessed files on our next-generation neurological treatment, the CBM 457 compound." My mind raced with implications. CBM 457 represented our most innovative work, a potential breakthrough for treating several degenerative neurological conditions with a novel mechanism of action unlike anything currently on the market. "How extensive was the breach?" I asked, maintaining outward calm despite my alarm. "Comprehensive. They obtained research protocols, preliminary trial results, and the complete synthesis pathway. We've implemented security protocols and contacted federal authorities, but the damage is done. Someone has our research." "Any indication who's responsible?" Sophia hesitated. "The attack was sophisticated, but our security team traced it to servers associated with Thornton Pharmaceuticals. Gerald Thornton, the CEO who had most aggressively questioned our model during the summit Q&A. The timing seemed unlikely to be coincidental. "I'll return immediately," I decided. "Arrange an emergency leadership meeting for tomorrow morning and ensure all research staff are available for briefing. We need to assess our options and develop a response strategy." As I ended the call, the contrast between the summit's optimistic discussions and this stark reality check couldn't have been sharper. While we had been sharing our vision for transforming the industry through collaboration and transparency, a competitor had apparently resorted to corporate espionage to obtain our innovations. This theft represented more than a business setback. It was a direct challenge to our fundamental approach. If our openness and collaborative methods made us vulnerable to such attacks, how could we maintain our principles while protecting our work? The answer to this question would determine whether our model truly offered a viable alternative or merely an idealistic vision too fragile for the industry's competitive realities. As I made arrangements for an immediate return to Cambridge, I felt not defeat, but a steeling of resolve. This challenge would test our model's resilience and our team's creativity in ways we hadn't anticipated. If our approach had genuine merit, we would find a response that maintained our principles while addressing this threat, perhaps even transforming it into an opportunity to further demonstrate the value of our alternative vision. The industry hadn't changed after one keynote speech, regardless of its reception. Real transformation would require navigating precisely these kinds of challenges while staying true to our foundational commitments. As I prepared to leave Chicago, I touched the golden key around my neck, drawing strength from the reminder of my dual heritage, the analytical problem-solving of my father and the creative reimagining of my mother. Both would be essential for the challenge ahead. I returned to Cambridge by private flight arranged by James Harrison, using the hours in the air to process our situation and develop initial response strategies. By the time we landed, I had outlined 3 potential approaches to address the data theft, each with distinct advantages and risks. The emergency leadership meeting began at 7 a.m. in our most secure conference room, with digital devices banned and security personnel stationed outside. Our team's expressions reflected a mixture of anger, concern, and determination as I briefed them on what we knew. Based on preliminary investigation, Thornton Pharmaceuticals accessed our research on CBM 457 approximately 36 hours ago, I explained. The timing, during my keynote at the summit where Gerald Thornton was present, suggests deliberate planning to exploit our reduced security vigilance. What exactly did they get? Thomas asked, his normally measured tone sharp with concern. Sophia displayed a security analysis on the conference room screen. Essentially everything: molecular structure, synthesis pathway, binding mechanism, preliminary efficacy data, and our development timeline. With this information, they could potentially replicate our work and accelerate their own competing treatment, which violates numerous laws, Elena noted, her legal expertise immediately identifying the applicable statutes. We have strong grounds for criminal charges and civil litigation. Assuming we can definitively prove their involvement, Martin cautioned. Corporate espionage cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute successfully, particularly against organizations with Thornton's resources. I nodded, acknowledging this reality. Which brings us to our response options. We have essentially 3 paths forward, each with significant implications. I outlined the alternatives I had developed during the flight. Pursue aggressive legal action against Thornton, accelerate our development timeline to maintain our market advantage despite the theft, or implement a third approach that aligned with our foundational commitments while addressing the immediate threat. The legal path is obvious but problematic, I explained. Even with compelling evidence, litigation would consume enormous resources, distract from our core work, and likely drag on for years with uncertain outcomes. Accelerating development carries significant risks as well, Sophia added. Rushing clinical trials could compromise patient safety and data integrity, directly contradicting our commitment to scientific integrity and patient-centered innovation. So, what's the third option? Thomas asked, leaning forward with interest. I took a deep breath, knowing my proposal would challenge conventional thinking about intellectual property and competitive strategy. We publish our complete research on CBM 457 immediately. Every detail Thornton stole and more. We make it publicly available to researchers worldwide. Stunned silence followed before voices erupted simultaneously. Publish our most valuable intellectual property? Martin exclaimed. The financial implications would be devastating. What about our patent applications? Elena questioned. Publication could undermine our legal protections. I raised my hand for quiet. I understand the concerns. This approach appears counterintuitive from a traditional business perspective, but consider it through the lens of our foundational commitments and longer-term strategy. For the next 20 minutes, I elaborated on the strategic rationale. By publishing our research, we would transform stolen proprietary information into a public contribution to medical knowledge. This would nullify Thornton's advantage while positioning Cassandra Biomedical as committed to scientific advancement above profit protection. Moreover, we could leverage our 18-month head start in development, established regulatory relationships, and manufacturing capabilities to maintain commercial advantage despite open-source research. We would supplement publication with accelerated patent filings on specific applications and delivery mechanisms, I explained. While the core research would become public domain, Our implementation expertise would preserve significant competitive advantage. It's risky, Thomas acknowledged, but conceptually aligned with our principles. We've committed to scientific transparency. This would demonstrate that commitment extends beyond convenient situations. The publicity value alone would be substantial, Martin conceded, his financial perspective beginning to recognize potential benefits. The contrast between Thornton's corporate espionage and our response would be stark. What about our investors? Elena asked, raising a practical concern. They supported our ethical approach, but this goes beyond what anyone anticipated. I'll speak with them personally, I replied. Some may withdraw support, but I believe many will recognize the strategic vision behind this approach, and those who remain will be truly aligned with our long-term mission. As discussion continued, perspectives gradually shifted from shock to thoughtful analysis of implementation details. By meeting's end, we had reached cautious consensus to pursue the publication strategy, with careful attention to timing, presentation, and supplementary patent protections. This may be remembered as either a brilliant strategic pivot or a catastrophic miscalculation, Thomas observed as the meeting concluded. But it's unquestionably consistent with who we've claimed to be as an organization. I smiled slightly at his assessment. Sometimes the riskiest action is failing to live by your stated principles when tested. Let's demonstrate that our commitments aren't merely marketing positions but genuine operational values. The next 72 hours unfolded in a carefully orchestrated implementation of our response strategy. Our legal team filed targeted patent applications for specific delivery mechanisms and manufacturing processes. Our communications department prepared comprehensive materials explaining our decision. Our research team compiled complete documentation of the CBM 457 research for publication. 3 days after discovering the breach, we simultaneously released our research to public scientific databases and issued a press statement explaining our action as a response to unauthorized access to our systems. While we didn't directly accuse Thornton Pharmaceuticals, the timing and circumstances created unmistakable implications. The industry reaction was immediate and polarized. Some analysts declared our move corporate suicide, predicting devastating financial consequences from surrendering valuable intellectual property. Others praised it as revolutionary leadership, recognizing the strategic sophistication beneath the apparent sacrifice. Thornton Pharmaceuticals issued a carefully worded statement denying any involvement in data theft, while simultaneously announcing their own neurological research program that would build upon recently available scientific insights. The transparent attempt to legitimize their use of stolen research only heightened the contrast between our approaches. Most importantly, patient advocacy groups responded with overwhelming support, recognizing that our decision prioritized accelerating treatment availability over profit maximization. The Michael J. Fox Foundation and other organizations focused on neurological conditions publicly commended our commitment to advancing science over commercial interests. A week after our publication, I convened a virtual meeting with our major investors to address concerns and explain our strategy in greater detail. While 2 institutional investors indicated they would reduce their positions, the majority expressed continued support, some even increasing their investment based on the long-term vision demonstrated by our response. You've transformed a potential crisis into a defining moment for your company, remarked Dr. Eliza Brennan, representing our largest institutional investor. This decision demonstrates that Cassandra Biomedical's ethical framework isn't merely theoretical, it's operational even under extreme pressure. As the immediate crisis stabilized, I found myself seeking perspective in my mother's studio one Saturday morning. Surrounded by her artwork, I contemplated the creative restructuring of conventional assumptions that had shaped our response to the data theft. By reframing proprietary research as a potential public contribution, we had transformed vulnerability into strength. exactly the kind of perception shift my mother had cultivated in her artistic practice. My reflection was interrupted by a call from James Harrison. "Have you seen today's Science Advanced publication?" he asked without preamble. "Not yet," I replied, curious about his urgency. "3 independent research groups have already built upon your published CBM 457 data," he explained. "They've identified potential applications beyond neurological conditions, including a promising direction for certain treatment-resistant cancers. The scientific community is calling it a textbook case for the value of open research models." This development validated a core premise of our strategy, that distributed scientific collaboration could accelerate innovation beyond what any single company could achieve, even with proprietary advantage. By opening our research, we had expanded its potential impact beyond our original vision. The following week brought another unexpected development when I received an invitation to meet with FDA Commissioner Dr. Margaret Chen. Her office indicated the discussion would address innovative models for pharmaceutical development and regulatory approval. The meeting took place at FDA headquarters with several senior officials present. Dr. Chen opened with remarkable directness. "Your handling of the CBM 457 situation has created an opportunity to reconsider how we approach development and approval for breakthrough treatments. We're interested in exploring a collaborative regulatory framework that might build upon your open research model." For the next 2 hours, we discussed a potential pilot program integrating Cassandra Biomedical's transparent research approach with modified regulatory review procedures. The framework would maintain rigorous safety standards while creating accelerated pathways for treatments developed through validated open science models. This could potentially transform how breakthrough medications reach patients, Dr. Chen concluded. We'd be establishing a parallel path to approval that incentivizes transparency and collaboration rather than secrecy and competition. With appropriate safeguards, I agreed. This approach could significantly reduce development timelines while maintaining safety standards. It's exactly the kind of structural innovation our healthcare system needs. As I left the meeting, I recognized that our response to the data theft had catalyzed possibilities far beyond our immediate situation. What began as a defensive strategy had opened conversations about fundamental industry transformation that might never have occurred otherwise. Upon returning to Cambridge, I found an unexpected visitor waiting in our reception area, Gerald Thornton, himself CEO of Thornton Pharmaceuticals. "This is certainly a surprise," I remarked as we settled in my office. "I wouldn't have expected a personal visit under the circumstances." Thornton's expression combined discomfort with grudging respect. "Recent events have necessitated some reconsideration of approaches," he said carefully. "While Thornton Pharmaceuticals maintains we had no involvement in any data security incident, your response has created an industry situation requiring adaptation." I waited silently, allowing him to continue without interruption. "The research you published has significant implications beyond any single company's capabilities," he acknowledged. "Our scientists have identified potential applications in areas where we have established expertise and infrastructure, which you're free to pursue," I reminded him. "That's the point of open research." "Yes," he agreed, revealing the purpose of his visit. "However, optimal development would benefit from collaboration between our respective organizations, combining your innovative research with our global manufacturing and distribution capabilities." The irony was almost too perfect. The very company that had attempted to steal our research was now proposing collaboration. Yet behind Thornton's obvious discomfort, I recognized a legitimate opportunity to advance our mission of improving patient outcomes. "I'm open to discussing specific collaborative frameworks," I replied, maintaining professional courtesy despite the circumstances. "Any partnership would need to align with our foundational commitments, including transparent research practices and accessible pricing models." Thornton winced slightly at these conditions, but nodded. We anticipated certain requirements. Our board has authorized me to explore arrangements that might accommodate your company's unique approach within defined parameters. By meeting's end, we had outlined preliminary terms for a limited collaboration, focusing on specific applications of CBM 457 technology, terms that would maintain Cassandra Biomedical's ethical standards while leveraging Thornton's global infrastructure to accelerate treatment availability. As Thornton departed, he paused at the door. Your keynote at the summit suggested theoretical advantages to your approach. Your response to the data incident demonstrated practical implementation. I didn't expect either to be quite so effective. It wasn't quite an apology for corporate espionage, but it represented something perhaps more valuable: recognition from a traditional industry leader that our alternative model had demonstrated viability under pressure. That evening, I shared developments with our leadership team during a strategy dinner at my home. Their reactions ranged from cautious optimism about the FDA's interest to skeptical concern about Thornton's true intentions. We've transformed a potentially devastating attack into multiple opportunities for advancing our mission, Thomas observed, summarizing our trajectory. The FDA regulatory initiative alone could create industry-wide impact beyond anything we might achieve independently, and force Thornton to engage on our terms rather than continuing as an adversary, Sophia added, though I maintain healthy skepticism about their true commitment to collaboration. Elena raised her glass in a spontaneous toast to finding opportunity in crisis and remaining true to our principles when it would have been easier to compromise. As conversation continued around the table, I found myself reflecting on the journey from Mitchell Pharmaceuticals' collapse to this moment. What had begun as my father's protective strategy had evolved into something far more significant: a working demonstration that pharmaceutical development could operate differently, profitably, effectively, and ethically. The data theft and our response had accelerated industry recognition of our approach, creating openings for structural change that might otherwise have taken years to develop. By refusing to react conventionally to crisis, we had turned vulnerability into catalytic leadership. The golden key around my neck caught the light as I reached for my glass, reminding me that this creative restructuring of assumptions, seeing possibility where others saw only threat, reflected the integrated legacy of both my parents. My father's strategic foresight and my mother's perceptual creativity had combined to shape my leadership approach in ways I was only now fully appreciating. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, noticing my momentary reflection. That sometimes our greatest contributions come not from executing predetermined plans, but from responding creatively to unexpected challenges, I replied. And that leadership often means reimagining the very nature of the problems we face. 2 years after founding Cassandra Biomedical, our response to the data theft had created momentum beyond anything we could have anticipated. The FDA pilot program for accelerated review of transparently developed treatments had officially launched, with our CBM 457 compound serving as the inaugural case study. 3 additional pharmaceutical companies had adopted elements of our open research model for early-stage development, creating an expanding ecosystem of collaborative innovation. Most surprisingly, our financial performance had strengthened rather than weakened following the publication of our research. While we had surrendered certain traditional competitive advantages, we had gained others: accelerated regulatory pathways, collaborative partnerships with research institutions worldwide, and unparalleled public trust that translated into patient participation in clinical trials and physician willingness to prescribe our treatments. The quarterly results exceed all projections, Martin reported during our executive review. Revenue is up 28% year over year, with particularly strong performance from our first 2 approved treatments. Operating costs remain 17% below industry average due to our collaborative development model and streamlined regulatory process. "And the CBM 457 program?" I asked, most interested in the treatment whose research we had published. Sophia smiled with evident satisfaction. Phase 3 trials are proceeding ahead of schedule with exceptional patient recruitment rates. More importantly, the expanded applications identified by external researchers have been validated in our supplementary studies. We're now pursuing 5 distinct treatment pathways rather than the 2 originally envisioned. Meaning the potential patient impact has more than doubled, Thomas added, which ultimately is the most meaningful metric of success. This perspective, measuring success by patient impact rather than merely financial performance, had become increasingly embedded in our organizational culture. We tracked traditional business metrics for operational viability, but our strategic decisions prioritized medical outcomes and accessibility. This balanced approach had attracted a distinctive workforce, professionals seeking both meaningful, purpose and sustainable business practices. Our company culture had developed its own rhythms and traditions. Monthly integration sessions brought together scientists, business analysts, patient advocates, and manufacturing specialists to share perspectives across traditional silos. Quarterly challenge conventions workshops encouraged teams to identify and reimagine established industry practices. Annual impact assessments evaluated our treatment's effects on patient outcomes, healthcare costs, and quality of life. I had continued my practice of spending Saturday mornings in my mother's studio, using the space for reflection and creative thinking. Gradually, these solitary sessions had evolved into occasional small gatherings, where team members with particularly challenging problems could benefit from the studio's environment and perspectives. On this particular Saturday, I had invited Priya, the young researcher whose alternative synthesis pathway had proven so valuable in our early days, to discuss a conceptual challenge she was facing with a new compound showing promise for autoimmune disorders. The molecular structure is elegant, she explained, gesturing to her models displayed on a tablet. But the current synthesis pathway is prohibitively complex for large-scale manufacturing. I've been approaching it purely as a chemistry problem, but something tells me there's a different way to see this. I studied her models while contemplating my mother's painting on the opposite wall, an abstract composition of interconnected organic forms that somehow maintained structural integrity despite their fluid arrangement. What if we're thinking too linearly? I suggested. Traditional synthesis pathways progress step by step toward the target molecule. But natural systems often assemble complex structures through parallel processes that converge. Priya's expression shifted as she reconsidered her approach. Like modular assembly rather than linear construction, she mused. We could potentially develop separate components simultaneously, then create conditions for self-assembly of the final structure. For the next 2 hours, we explored this conceptual shift, sketching potential approaches inspired as much by artistic composition as chemical engineering. By session's end, Priya had outlined a novel synthesis framework that might overcome the manufacturing challenges while potentially reducing production costs. This is why your leadership style is so different, she observed as we prepared to leave the studio. You actually see molecules as creative opportunities rather than just technical challenges. Her comment reminded me how thoroughly my dual heritage had shaped not just my personal approach, but our entire organizational methodology. The integration of analytical precision with creative perception had become Cassandra Biomedical's signature strength. Our capacity to reimagine pharmaceutical development by seeing connections and possibilities others overlooked. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from